Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Shibani Joshi, and today we're going to be talking about righting the retirement ship, especially in these somewhat uncertain economic times. Joining us for this exciting conversation is Salene Hitchcock-Gear. She's Prudential's president of individual life insurance. It's great to see you, Salene.
Oh, so good to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation for you, and we've got a lot of people filing in. And before we jump in here, I want to remind everybody that this is a conversation that you can be a part of. Feel free to chat in your questions on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will be taking questions throughout this session. And with that, let's just get right to it. Salene, I want to start with what's top of mind for you and probably every single person in this room right now. We're bracing for another deep dive into a sea of uncertainty going into the rest of this year and certainly into next year. How can we best protect ourselves when it comes to our financial futures from your standpoint?
Great question. So the first thing I just want to share with everybody is I'm some 35 years now in financial services, worked in investments, insurance, a whole variety of things. And one thing I would say over the period of time is we will see ups and downs, no matter where we think we are. There's something out there to worry about, whether it's rising rates or inflation. Uncertainty in economic times is always around us. And so it's really important to just keep that perspective. We always think this time is different, but it's actually not. And what that really means is we need to make sure we're sticking with the tried and true strategies that help you weather the uncertain times. And we're in some of those right now. It really has to do with whether or not you actually have a plan. And I always start there because it can be small, it can be big, but the idea that you have goals, you write them down, you have something to guide you. It is the thing that will anchor you when you face these uncertain times, because you always have to pull yourself back to where are you going? What are you trying to achieve? And when it comes to money matters, oftentimes we don't write things down. We don't really have a plan. We might have a savings goal, but not think about retirement. We might be worried about saving for college, but not really understand the big picture around our budgets, et cetera. So uncertainty is going to be with us. The anchors that we bring around us to help us through them start with having a real plan. Do it yourself with the financial advisor, however you get there, but focus so that you have something to hold on to in uncertainty. Right now, for example, I think one of the most important things is when we're getting to year end, you got annual enrollments, you have benefits, you have, things around your retirement plans. If your employer, provides all of those, it's a really good time right now to take a look at all of that.
Great. And I just want to remind some of our audience members, we are seeing your chats that there are some technical difficulties through the platform. CNBC and the producing team is looking into that. Many of you are able to hear it. We're going to keep plowing through, but we are addressing and we see your tech issues. So continue to stay with us. And Salene, just stay with us also. If there are any tech issues that arise, we will work through this. I want to start with now moving on with mainstream myths that you can debunk around financial planning and retirement. There are people that I believe kind of fall into one of two buckets. You're getting ready to retire or you're a long ways off from retiring. That's overgeneralizing, but what advice can you give to somebody with someone who has retirement somewhere in the near term?
So great question. And starting with that one, I'd say the first thing that I see is that people get discouraged if they feel like they're too far along and too close to retirement. Absolutely not true. I always say the best time to start is today, right now. No matter if you have 5 years or 5 days, start today. Money works over time. It's a really simple prospect, but when you find that you are, thinking about your upcoming goal, the first thing you want to do is focus on when. So time is probably the single most significant indicator on your strategy, because it will determine what you might need to do. So for those of you who are close to retirement, and I'll call that 3 to 5 years, not 6 months, let's say 3 to 5 years, the very first thing you want to do is reassess your retirement thinking around when you think you need income. That's a big question because retirement has changed in definition for a lot of people. Some people leave a full-time job to do something else and so still have income coming in. Some folks really just hang it all up and want to go live off of their savings. So first, think about where are you in reality and what do you see as your actual time frame for needing income. Once you're thinking more about that, you can take a look at what you've accumulated and then make two very important decisions from there. If you have a long time, and for example, let's say you're a very healthy 65-year-old, someone in your family lived to be 100, you've got to think about 35 years of income. And so one of the big things that we see is people get very conservative as soon as they're nearing retirement. And it is always smart and very wise to think about, what you might need for liquidity, but do not forget the longevity side of your retirement and how many years you might have to have income so that you don't get overly conservative and you leave some money to continue to work for you. Extremely important to not go too liquid too fast, too conservative too fast, and to make sure you've got an appropriate asset allocation for where you are. Again, some of these things you can find good online advice. Some of you will have financial advisors, but that will be the single first thing to do. The second thing behind that is to put the right asset allocation to work for you. So once you understand your time frame, you understand how much you really think you're going to need when, you've got to really then put the right strategy behind that so that the exposure you need for long-term growth is there, but the liquidity you might need in the near term is there. And the way I'd like to say this is money's personal to all of us. So is your retirement. And you've got to think specifically about you and your needs and then what you need to do around that, starting with the time frame, I think is the biggest guide.
Yeah, it's interesting because so many of us think of retiring or a retirement date as an arrival date, but what you bring out is that it's a time horizon, right? And potentially a long one. And then you add into that, if you're younger, if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s and you have major investments ahead of you, what is the advice that you give to somebody with a longer time horizon and probably a higher risk appetite as well?
Yeah, so both of those things work together. So obviously when you're younger, you've got more time to plan. So if you make a few mistakes, I say you have time to correct. The single biggest thing that I see in younger folks is just not starting to save soon enough. So, two things about this. One is always pay yourself first, no matter how old you are, but certainly when you're younger, there's always a lot of pull on your finances, whether it's, saving for your first home, taking care of college debt, or whatever might be more near term for you. Those pressures are going to be there. But I don't care if it's $5, $10, or $100 a month. Start to do something. The time value of money is real. Money accumulates over time. And there is a way to do well starting early, even with small sums of money. And again, putting more money aside. As you think about that, the very first thing that I always tell, younger folks is investing means you can take some risk. Always start investing after you've taken care of your early needs, which is to make sure you have at least a 3 to 6 month savings amount set aside in cash that you can get to if you have any emergency, whether it's a car repair, you lose your job, something unexpected comes up, because any money that you have actually put aside, even let's say if you've, earlier been able to open an IRA or have a little bit in retirement account, the last thing you want to do is go back and dip in to some of those safety nets, you'd call them, early on if you don't have to. So always start when you're younger with making sure you are putting enough money aside for emergencies. Then think about investing, starting first really with retirement now. Retirement tends to sneak up on people, but if you get in the habit of putting some money aside, again, even small amounts, and if you're working for an employer, find whatever savings plan they have, because you have usually some match event that will occur. Your employer will put something in that plan with you. That's free money. So don't lose sight of it. And even if you think, I'm going to leave in a year, I'm not going to be here long, doesn't matter. That money can travel with you. So start early, putting money up for retirement. So savings in terms of emergency funds, start with retirement because you want to be consistent over time and make sure you have a good habit. The third thing is to think about what might be your first near-term big financial goal. Is it buying a car, buying a house, paying off that student debt? Thinking about those goals and then setting yourself up either with the right investment approach or the right pay down strategy for debt management, whatever it might be. But I'd say always take care of the first two things, then start to think about your next near-term goal.
Thinking about building it as many layers of a foundation, it sounds like. I want to move now to what you're hearing in terms of the current environment. I know that Prudential regularly conducts a pulse research survey, taking a look at Americans and their viewpoints on lots of different things, including financial wellness work, their relationship with money. Walk us through the recent findings and things that caught your attention.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we do this on a regular basis. Several thousand people will go out across a wide variety of ages, backgrounds, incomes, just to really get a sense for what's on everybody's mind. And as you started this conversation, the first thing is what's coming next, right? The recession word is out there. We keep hearing a lot about supply chain issues and slowdowns. We've got a war happening. There are so many things that people are concerned about, but it really is about the recession and about how people are feeling with market volatility. So when you understand that people are getting nervous and they're anxious, again, the first thing that we want to start talking about is what can help you get back in balance. And that's just sort of resetting yourself around any goals and plans that you have, and actually identifying any urgencies that might have appeared. So the pandemic has really raised all of our anxiety, and the stress levels that people are dealing with are quite high. Some people have changed jobs, had to leave jobs. Some of us have had to leave for caregiving duties because a loved one or family member got sick. So we're in a reset period for sure. So you've got to say, where am I today? And then what is it, that I can do going forward? We found a couple of interesting things there. Millennials are finding a very high degree of stress and uncertainty, really around how they're going to fare in this next environment. And specifically, what should they be doing with their money? So again, I've been in and around this for a long time. If you think about the rapid rise in rates, what we were saying when rates were low is that savers were getting harmed because you had no other place to go but in the stock market. Now there are more guarantees and sort of instruments that will come back in vogue because rates are rising. However, rates are rising right when we're having a volatile equity market. So millennials are feeling the squeeze, kind of all of these dynamics at once, and saying, well, if I'm thinking about putting money aside, we hear some in equities, some in bonds, but if you're holding bonds right now, you're not feeling too good about them if you need some liquidity. So lots of really important questions. But for millennials in particular, they're in a really good place just based on their age segment. And again, because they have some tools that they can work with, we believe strongly that one of the things to really pay attention to right now is, while you're thinking about your money, are you thinking about your downside protection? So most people are thinking about investing, but the downside protection should be on everybody's mind, because as soon as you take care of that, you can sleep a little better at night. So for example,
what are some of those ways? What are some of those ways, Salene? Downside protection.
Do you have disability insurance, right? When you're younger, when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you're not thinking about this, but you have a greater chance of being disabled before you're 50 than you do of dying. So if you have an income issue, an income impact, can you deal with that? That sounds a lot like whether or not you've got disability protection. If you are a millennial, and again, back to our survey, and have a young family, do you have life insurance protection? So if something happens to you, you feel like people are cared for. And then are you thinking about what might happen over the next 5 to 10 years, again, around your income circumstances, and whether or not you feel like you've got the right strategy in place around both the amount you might be setting aside or your asset allocation. So did you get aggressive, thinking that, you might find some opportunities? We hear a lot about new investments like crypto, for example, and people get kind of energized around things that are new. But what's happened there? And then how are you thinking about your risk mitigants if you've put some money against things that, didn't have the kind of certainty and background view of knowing what would all happen? So think about downside risk as one of the elements to help you de-stress. All right, we're hearing this about millennials in particular, so that you have some protection. Then think about your plan and think about specifically, again, your asset allocation and what things you might want to think about with rising rates, which might give you some benefits to a little bit more certainty, and volatile equity markets, and just kind of come back in line.
I want to touch now on minority communities and their access to financial security and protection. Is this something we're seeing across the board in those communities when it comes to their outlook and retirement and financial futures?
Yeah, great question. So also in our Pulse survey, we found specifically that Black Americans were a lot more optimistic about their futures in the next 3 to 5 years. That was, pretty revealing to us, and that's a good sign. And the reason that's a good sign is that in our financial services environment, access has been a real question for Black Americans and trust in financial institutions. So if we have this moment now where we can see that this particular population is eager and optimistic, it's a great time for all of us to make sure that we're providing the right access to information, the right access to the instruments and tools that can help more Black Americans put their money to work. It isn't too long ago, even in my household, where I will tell you that my own mother put money behind the refrigerator because she was worried about banks. We really have come a long way, which is good news. And again, seeing this optimism take hold is important, but we've got to match that with the right amount of outreach and information so that people have a way in. In the financial services community, we have wonderful tools to help people do better, take down debt, build wealth. But it's awfully hard to do it if you're not invited into the conversation. So it's a real open door for us now to do that. And we at Prudential are certainly paying attention to that, looking at more digital solutions, looking at more online information, trying to work directly in communities to make sure that people have the research, the insights, and the financial professionals available, quite frankly, to assist.
Well, that is terrific to hear, and we appreciate you and Prudential's efforts around that. I want to move now to asking you you were talking about millennials and different generations. Given your seasoned background and industry experience, I know you're a mother of 3, I am as well, and we're all noticing price increases, the price of toys my kids have talked about, the price of their Starbucks, whatever. How do you advise clients and our audience members to talk to younger generations about money and the path to a more secure financial future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so my children, although they're still on my cell phone bill, so I don't know how this counts. They're adults. I've got my oldest.
It never ends. Okay, I get it.
It never ends. My youngest is 24. But they're right in this space where advice and guidance about what to do with money is critically important. The first thing I would say, and again, this is a little bit what we were talking about before, age matters and time matters. So for younger children, what I think a lot about is, do they ever see and touch money, right? In this world where you swipe or there's Venmo and all these things, do they actually physically understand what a dollar looks like? I have a friend who just sent a college freshman away and went back for Parents Weekend. And her favorite story was the counselor saying, we take kids in to do their laundry. They don't know what quarters are to put into the laundry machine. So if you don't physically, tangibly know what money looks like, how do you understand what it is? First thing I would say is rules and boundaries. So for younger children, allowances, giving them the money, having them do things with it, talking about it, making smart choices early, simple things, but things that will stick. Teenagers and older, real discipline around what you can spend for what things and why. And in some households, chores might come along with allowance. So what kind of work ethic are you actually instilling in younger people to know it takes something to get that, in hand?
Absolutely. We only have a minute or two left here, Salene. Great advice for younger generations. I've been watching the chats. There are a lot of questions that have been coming in, a lot of questions of people who are already retired. So we've talked about the walk up to retirement, entering, but what is the number one piece of advice, or give us as much as you can in the last few moments, to someone who's actually already retired and dealing with the stress of inflation and fixed income?
Yeah, really important. So remember, you have a lot of tools around you. The first thing is your budget, right? Even though we get into retirement and we see all the pictures of people going to the beach, budgets are just as important when you retire as when you're working. So go back, relook at your budget, figure out where you actually are. The simple thing about opening your mail, staying on top of everything holds true in retirement. So budget first. Second thing is, what is your income strategy? So retirement is, in a healthy retirement is all about trying to make sure you have income when you need it. It is the toughest thing for financial advisors. In fact, there's a whole cottage industry on, decumulation, taking the money that you've set aside and making sure that you can have it, kind of pay out as you need it. A lot of strategies used to, and I say used to because of rising rates, focus on bond ladders and places where you could have steady income coming through. Well, if you set something like that up and rates are now climbing, what might you need to do to think about that strategy that you put in place? So be mindful of what you need to spend, what assets you have around you, and what have you already, let's say, turned on, and think about, what you're doing with those particular assets. For many people who are in retirement, we will take some kind of an approach where you have money now for the next 5 or 10 years. Hopefully you still have some money working for you. And then you might have some money, what I call for emergencies like long-term care and things that might be out into the future. It might be a good idea to take a look at those second tier stages. So if you don't need the money now, what else can you do? Again, back to diversification and asset allocation. I am a big fan of rising rates, not for my company and my work-related environment, but because it does reward savers. So you might be able to take some risk down and look for some instruments that will start to look and feel more like guarantees. The final part to this is, and I don't want to get into product descriptions, but there are products that you can purchase that put a backstop to your retirement income. We call those annuities in the insurance business, but you can actually trade that risk and put a guarantee in place so you have income of a certain amount every month. We don't really have pensions anymore. Some of our older generation who are now 60s and 70s, they might have that ability. But for the most part, we have to build our own. So an annuity might be something that you take a portion of your money for, where you can rely on that every single month to come in and trade that risk, right? That's what professionals do and think about all the time. So they can be very helpful.
Salene Hitchcock-Gear, so much great advice for so many different audiences. Thank you to everyone who's joined us in on this conversation. We're glad to have had you for this fantastic conversation. I wish we had more time, but we don't. This is the end of the session. Thank you again, Salene, for being with us today.
Oh, so great to be with you today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.